Today, Rolls-Royce Motorcars Ltd. is an English company of BMW AG division, specializing in the production of luxury cars. Luxury, prestige, comfort, and reliability. All these words fully describe each Rolls-Royce car, which has been produced for more than 100 years. The history of Rolls-Royce Limited dates back to May 1904, when Henry Royce, a British engineer, met British aviator, car racer, and owner of one of the first automobile showrooms, Charles Rolls, for a very ordinary lunch. Henry's family could not boast of large incomes. Henry Royce was born the fifth child in the family of James Royce, an ordinary miller who worked in a rented mill, and the financial situation was so bad that they even had to leave home and move to London in search of a better life. Of course, the main provider in the family was his father, and he found a pretty good job in the capital. But after only a year at a new school, Henry had to become an adult. It so happened that in 1872 Henry's father died, so the boy had to earn money by delivering newspapers and telegrams. He was only 9 years old at the time. Left without a father, Henry had to learn everything on his own. Thanks to good relations with his aunt, the boy was able to get a job as a foreman in the railroad workshops, and it was there that the young man learned to understand well the various mechanisms and their structure. Later, the acquired experience helped Henry to get a job in the electric company, however, as an ordinary electrician. And after a while, the man moved to Liverpool. With the work, Royce coped better than others. At the company, he quickly acquired good acquaintances, one of whom turned out to be like-minded and as brilliant a man as Royce himself, Ernest Claremont. A few days after their acquaintance, they realized that they dreamed of the same thing, namely to create something of their own. But alas, as it often happens, they simply did not have the money for it. So the ideas were nurtured in their heads for several years, while they saved up money to start their own business. And in 1884, having saved £20, Ross, together with Ernest Claremont, founded a manufactory for the production of electrical appliances. Then Henry was only 22 years old and did not start with the production of electric doorbells. What were these bells? They looked very simple, much simpler than their competitors, and cost almost twice as much, but they never broke down. Royce had already revealed the proud formula, price is forgotten, quality lasts for a long time, and already in 1894 was founded a company for the production of cranes, Royce and Company, which 5 years later placed its shares on the stock exchange and even built a factory in Walt Trafford. By the way, the cranes designed by Royce were produced after his death until 1964. It was during this period, having saved up some money, Royce was able to buy his first French-made car, but after driving the Dédéon for a few years, the man realized that he was absolutely dissatisfied with the quality of the Frenchman. As Henry himself later recalled, the car did not meet its stated requirements and broke down so often that he even had to disassemble and reassemble the car himself. It was then that frequent breakdowns and poor quality components inspired the man to create a car built to his own design. And, in fact, at the same moment fate and brought together purposeful Royce with Rolls, no less interested car enthusiast. As for Charles, it was quite a different story. Since his youth, he was fond of mechanical engineering and even studied it at Cambridge University. Besides, he was the first student on the stream who independently purchased a car and began to participate in races. It is worth noting that he was lucky to be born into a noble and very rich family which always supported any endeavors of a car enthusiast. So, thanks to his connections and good financial situation, the young man was able to open a salon for the sale of foreign-made cars. And everything would be fine, but the only snag was the suppliers, who then missed the deadlines for delivery of cars and components to them, and sometimes even brought absolutely wrong. For several years the man was looking for a reliable partner, but again, it was 1904. At that time, many people had not even heard of cars, and Henry Ford had just launched his then small production a year ago. In general, Charles had a hard time. He was alone in this very difficult business, but as you have already realized, it was so until he met Henry Royce. Their first meeting was also quite fascinating. It was Charles Rolls who sent a telegram to the artisanal engineer inviting Henry to come to London to negotiate. But his reply greatly surprised him. "Do you want it? You come." And it is worth noting that the Honorable Charles Rolls was not lazy and went. They met on May 4th, 1904, in the restaurant of the Midland Hotel. Royce was 41 and Rolls was 26. But beyond age, there was a class divide between them. A rich kid and a working man who'd made it on his own. But they found common ground. The men began working together in early 1905, although they had signed a contract a year earlier. And very soon, the world was presented with the first cars of their joint design. Thus, thanks to good connections, Rose quickly informed the press that he was working on his own production of cars, thus fueling interest in the future novelty. By the way, the union of these two men, you could say, was perfect. Henry Royce created excellent cars from the point of view of engineering, but Charles Rose was able to sell them perfectly. Already from the very beginning in the company, all powers were divided equally. Henry did not cut into sales and commerce, and Charles did not prevent Henry from creating. Perhaps this was one of the main secrets of success. The founders of the company complemented each other perfectly. The company, named Rolls-Royce by the end of the year, the company was already selling cars. The first model was the Silver Ghost, designed at the Royce factory on Cock Street in Manchester and took to the road in 1907. It was originally powered by a 7,036 cubic centimeter engine with 6 cylinders, but in 1909, this was increased to 7,428 cubic centimeters. The price of the new model, produced by the young Rolls-Royce firm, was an unthinkable £985, but it was only the chassis with the engine, and the buyer, having laid out almost £1,000 for the bare mechanism, had to pay the same amount for the body, about £2,000 sterling. For this money, you could buy a mansion in London. But even so, the founders were not going to discount the price. They used in their cars all the best modern, first of all emphasizing on quality, and maximally trying to move away from unconvincing competitors of that time in the face of the same French. And it should be said that the car still found its buyers, and the model was produced up to 1925 and enjoyed great popularity among other motorists and even racers. But the most interesting was still ahead. Be that as it may, and soon it became clear that the money is definitely not enough. Because Rose was only the 5th child in the family, and his father was well, and his inheritance was not in a hurry to leave. Had to increase the number of shareholders. That in the final form, with a large plant in Derby Rose, and Royce got not so many shares. Both of them, incidentally, joined the first board and took positions. Royce, chief engineer, and Rose, technical director. The men realized that the largest and fastest growing market at that time was over the ocean. That is why after the first presentation of the joint car, they traveled to the United States in order to personally present their own invention there. It was there that one event took place that changed the history of the automobile brand forever. During the trip, Rolls met the Wright brothers, the creators of the world's first airplanes. And soon aviation so captured Charles's heart that he became seriously interested in flying. He quickly mastered all the necessary knowledge in this field, and a few months later, he sat at the wheel of an airplane for the first time. He was even able to fly across the English Channel on his own. It seemed that everything was going to Rolls and plunge into piloting, but in the field of chance, or maybe intentionally, aviation became another serious business of the new company. So, having negotiated all the details, Rolls-Royce develops the first aircraft engines, the main designer of which became Henry, and which, by the way, are successfully produced to this day, and not just produced, but are still considered the standard and the best of its kind. It is believed that it is thanks to this sphere Rolls-Royce managed to stay afloat during the First World War. The partners had many plans for the future, and it is unknown what the company would be today. But things changed dramatically in 1910. One very ordinary day, Henry Royce receives one of the worst news of his life. During another landing competition, Charles Rolls is killed. At a height of about 7 meters, the tail of his biplane broke off, thus leaving the pilot no chance. Thus, Charles Royce became the first pilot in England to crash. Death was his style. This man loved to be first. According to legend, it was as a sign of mourning for Royce that the board decided to make black one of the crossed letters R of the Rolls-Royce logo. From that minute, no matter how the businessman became, all rights to the farm, all finances, as well as all problems, became the property of Royce. Wartime was a period of stagnation for the company in the automobile industry. But even during this period, Henry Royce tried to create something new that would leave afloat the company, created by the long and hard work of two interested people. Thanks to the persistent efforts in 1921, Royce was able to open a factory in the U.S. There was also developed the R engine, which served for seaplanes. The plant, by the way, existed for only 5 years. Sales began to fall rapidly because for American motorists, it was fundamental that the car was assembled in foggy Albion. In 1922, another Rolls-Royce car appeared on the world, named Baby, Rolls-Royce 20 HP. Given the niche that the manufacturer occupied, the number of cars sold was measured not in thousands, but in hundreds, and it was very difficult to maintain production at such volumes. So, having thought over the development strategy, this car was created specifically for middle-class drivers, doctors, lawyers, businessmen, and was equipped with a 6-cylinder engine with a volume of 3,127 cubic centimeters, which developed a speed of 99 kilometers per hour. To replace the Silver Guest came the first car of the range, Phantom, which was assembled both on the territory of Great Britain and in the USA. Only 3,463 such cars were produced, and in 1929, the Phantom 1 was replaced by the Phantom 2. This car was the first of its kind, accelerating up to 120 kilometers per hour, and was produced until 1935, when it was replaced by the Phantom 3. Be that as it may, this model was the last car of the pre-war era to be manufactured entirely in-house. In 1931, Rolls-Royce acquired some of the assets of its competitor Bentley, which was in a poor financial situation. The purchase took place because Bentley cars had a well-established reputation of good, expensive, and, most importantly, reliable cars and limousines, thanks to which they were very similar to the cars of Rolls-Royce. Thus, for Henry Royce himself did not become a major competitor. Well, and we have imperceptibly approached 1933. At that time, Henry was already 70 years old, and he could barely cope with all his duties, but at the same time did not leave the post of chief engineer and chief inspirer for a day. And on April 22, 1933, Henry Royce was gone. And back in 1911, while resting on the French Riviera, Royce became seriously ill. A couple of months later, the man underwent the most complicated operation at that time, and in general, no one thought that the man would make it. But Henry did, and lived for another 20 years. He barely made it to his 70th birthday. That's when the second letter in the logo turned black. It's just a legend, though. Some believe in it, and some do not. All these terms of changing the color of letters do not coincide with the dates of death of the founders of the company, and, perhaps, the logo was repainted for a much more trivial reason. There were just a lot of orders for burgundy Rolls-Royces, and red doesn't look good on burgundy. After Henry's death, the main shareholders and the board of directors became the managers of the company, but they were forbidden to deviate from the basic rules of car production, which Henry and Charles had prescribed during their lifetime. As for one of the main symbols of Rolls-Royce flying female figure, very little is known. Royce himself was always against any figures on the car. In his opinion, they spoiled the appearance of the car, its streamlining, and gave a certain cheapness to an already cheap car. But more and more often he began to notice that after buying a car of his brand, they put anything on the car, and after that Henry gave up. It was better to cross this amateurishness, looking for something more appropriate. There is another interesting story. Once the editor of Car magazine, Sir John Montague, bought one of the Rolls-Royce cars for his personal use and commissioned the modernist Charles Sykes to sculpt it on the hood. Seeking inspiration, the sculptor decided to visit one of the company's factories to see firsthand how each car was assembled. For 2 weeks, Sykes went as in the water lowered. And then one day, going to Montague to refuse the order, suddenly in the corridor of his office fell in love with the secretary. The girl's name was Eleanor Thornton. Sophisticated, beautiful, daring, and impetuous, the girl crashed into Sykes's head in a minute. That's when he realized what a piece of jewelry for a car like a Rolls-Royce should look like. The sculptural portrait of Eleanor was named Whisper. The figurine on the car became more and more in demand. At the same time, the development of the universal symbol was entrusted again to Sykes. His obsession with Eleanor became another inspiration. This time he depicted her in a windswept garment preparing to jump. This variant was called the Spirit of Ecstasy, and from 1911 was invariably mounted above the radiators of all Rolls-Royces. Each figure was cast by Sykes and his daughter until 1948. Then the company took over the casting. By the way, Eleonora never reciprocated with Culpter. The Second World War made certain adjustments in the development of the company and the pace of production of new cars. But already in 1949, Rolls-Royce Silverdown was put into serial production, and a year later there was another novelty of the automobile market, Silver Cloud. In the early 50s, the company began to produce the Phantom 4 model, created especially for the royal family of the first persons of the state. The main feature of the Phantom 4 was that the car could drive for a long time at the speed of a pedestrian. This feature was necessary during official ceremonies, and the engine did not overheat at all. The Phantom 4 was replaced by the perfect Phantom 5, which collected all the characteristics of previous models. 1968 was marked for Rolls-Royce by the release of Phantom 6. The car was produced exclusively in limousine bodies and was removed from production only in 1992. The 70s became a period of crisis for the company, and in 1971, Rolls-Royce officially became bankrupt. The situation was saved by ordinary British residents, as well as the government. The latter invested $250 million in the development of the company. The first model that appeared after the crisis was Rolls-Royce Cornish, a first-class coupe cabriolet, which stayed on the automobile market until 1995. From that moment until the 90s, such cars as Rolls-Royce Camagua, Rolls-Royce Silver Wraith II, Silver Spirit, and Silver Spar, as well as Park Wirt, were produced. To celebrate its 90th anniversary, the company decided to release the Rolls-Royce Flying Spar model. There are 50 such models in the world, which were sold out in just 2 days, but the company was not able to stay afloat on its own. Every second, a huge number of cars were produced in the world, and in turn Rolls-Royce was not just a car, it was history and status. And in the same year, control over the company passed into the hands of the German concern BMW, and the brand Bentley was taken over by Volkswagen Group. But the transition to another concern in no way prevented the development of the brand Rolls-Royce. It still holds a leading position in its segment of luxury cars and continues to enjoy enduring popularity among Hollywood celebrities and aristocratic families around the world. There have always been legends around Rolls-Royce, and most of them are true. So, for example, absolutely every assembled car is subjected to tests in the form of 2,000 kilometers of test mileage, and then again disassembled to the screw, where each of its parts is thoroughly checked, and only after that there is body painting and final assembly. You bet, because it will soon be driven not by a simple worker, but by a royal person or president. It is also interesting that painting is carried out in 12 layers of nitro paint, as synthetics does not give a sense of depth of color. At the same time, each of the layers is polished before the next one is applied. Each figure on the hood also undergoes a polishing procedure, and only with powdered ground cherry seeds. Back in the early days, Henry Royce made it a rule to build each car like a yacht, very carefully, Rolls specified, to an individual design, tailored to each specific customer, and even invented the slogan, "No two Rolls-Royces are alike, and every element of finishing should be as perfect as the mechanism. Say, all glass parts should be polished with special pumice for optical faces." Well, and probably the most famous fact, all Rolls-Royce cars are assembled only in Great Britain and still manually. At the plant in Goodwood, there are only 2 robots applying paint on the body. All other work is done by hands of real professionals and amateurs. As for the Rolls-Royce aircraft engine division, they made a major contribution to the Great War, as Henry's invention accounted for more than half of the Allied Air Force. Airplanes with his engines crossed the Atlantic in 16 hours and were the first to fly from England to Australia. To this day, Rolls-Royce cars remain a symbol of taste and wealth, and their quality is evidenced by the fact that up to now 60% of all manufactured cars are on the move and at the same time every day only becoming more expensive. The company was created by 2 patriots of automobile industry, 2 people with heart and soul devoted to their work, and this is another indicator of how you really need to love what you do. Friends, and with what brand of automobiles is luxury positioned specifically for you? Be sure to write about it in the comments. Also write whether you have ever had to see these cars in person. Well, that's probably all for today. Enjoy the video.